I did it. I went against my better judgment, and I let my wife convince me to let her cousin, who's homeless, lazy, and has no job, to live with us. It was only supposed to be for a few weeks, but you know how that goes. I'm 30 and male and have always been someone that other people can turn to for help anytime or at any point in their life. I'm just inclined to help no matter what, and never almost regret it, even if the person ends up trampling on my generosity. But in this story, I got regret doing something for a wife's immediate family member. Who would have guessed he was even someone like that? Although some friends had advised me in the past to tighten up a bit because people would end up using me, but at the time, I was more of a yes person and everybody was happy. I was happy, so I didn't see any need to change. But here I am now, and let me quickly let you in on it, so you don't get too confused. A year ago, my wife came home looking all depressed. I was surprised because just that morning, she was in high spirits and she had a job promotion the day before. So I say this to her, "Babe, are you alright? Why the sad face? If you're hungry, I could make you something quick for you, or if you had a problem at work." And she says, "No, not really, it's just one of my younger cousins is in a situation that he can't get out of." I curiously wondered the exact problem, and I hoped that it was nothing serious at least. "So you see," my wife says, "my cousin's quite lazy. Not that lazy, though." So I'd already knew that she was sweet talking this cousin of hers because of the way she was pinching her fingers together as she described him. Her feelings were so exaggerated, and I feared for what was about to come out of her mouth. Anyways, she would have known that even if she had said as it was, I would have probably still granted her favor. Wife says this: since he doesn't do anything around the house and doesn't support his wife, she's gotten pretty fed up with him. And now, I interrupted her, I needed to know exactly why he wasn't doing anything to help his wife and the breadwinner of the home. Can you tell me why he isn't doing anything to help his loving wife? Does he have an ailment that doesn't permit him to work, or what? I was almost scared for him now. What if it was something serious? It was until later that I realized that earlier before, my wife, who we can call Amelia, had mentioned that her cousin was lazy. But was he so lazy that he couldn't even look for a job to assist his wife? The first thing I asked next was if he had any children of his own, and she said no. I said, "Thank goodness," underneath my breath, and asked her to continue her little story. I didn't know where it was going. Wife says, so they've been married for almost a year, and his wife's tired of keeping up with the nonsense. She wants to get a divorce and kick him out of the house since it's basically hers. When I think it's over, after hearing almost the full story, there's nobody that can tell me that he didn't deserve it or see that coming. Wife says, so now that he's without a wife or a home, he's literally stranded physically and at life. So I was hoping we could just let him stay for a few weeks until he gets himself together. I say this. Honestly, he's not in much of a situation. He should first of all try to get a job. That's the same reason that his wife wants a divorce. He'll also have a home of his, at least in his name, in no time if he looks for a job and works hard at it. My wife replies with, I don't really know, but this isn't the first time that we've advised him about his carefree lifestyle, so there's no helping that for now. No helping that, I think. Is that even a grown man, like she had mentioned earlier before, in a kid's body or what? Wife says, so, now that that's out of the way, I need you to help me let him come to our house. I froze. With the full description of this man that my wife had just given me, I didn't like this man one bit. I looked at her, and she was giving me these puppy-eyed faces, and turned away and gave her a yes. What's up, guys? Mr. Reddito here. I hope you guys are having a great day. So this story has a few updates. Update number 1 takes place just a few days after. Let's go ahead and jump into that now. So, in the last update, cousin had not yet fully gotten divorced. He still begged the first few days thinking he had a chance, but his wife was seriously done with him, and did not give him any listening ear. When he finally moved out and came over to ours, my wife drove to pick him up, and when they arrived, I came outside to usher them in. Upon looking at his belongings, it didn't look like he was planning to stay for only a few weeks like he had mentioned. but I quickly brushed the idea away. I'm sure that following this event, he'd learn a big lesson and become as hardworking as ever to obtain a roof over his head again. And I'm sure he didn't have anywhere to keep them since his wife had asked him to pack all his belongings. I helped my wife wheel the luggage in and gave him a room in our home. There was a total of 7 rooms in our house, including the guest room in our home. I put him in one of the usual rooms so he wouldn't feel like an alien. My wife's cousin was also my cousin, and I wanted him to be very comfortable. But I also hope that sooner or later he would realize that his lazy lifestyle will take him nowhere, and he'll eventually change very soon. After setting in, he came downstairs for some lunch. I was working in my office until my wife called me down. After eating lunch, we had an unspoken rule in my home that after lunch, every one of us would clear their own dirty dish without wanting or waiting on my wife to do it. My 2 children had already begun clearing their own dishes when cousin moved his plate from in front of them, suggesting that they take his too to the kitchen and watch it for him. My wife and I saw it, and we exchanged our glances, and my wife smiled at me as if to tell me to let it go. She quickly stood up and took them all to wash instead. The children needed to go to school that morning, or did he not know that? I decided to tell him after my wife had entered the kitchen so he would be aware in case he wasn't. So, the thing is, the children have to be at school as early as possible, so it wouldn't be alright to hand over your plates to them to wash them when they literally have to go get ready and be somewhere in less than an hour. He looked at me and gave me a, "Oh, I wasn't aware." You weren't aware that children aged 7 and 5 are attending school, or he didn't attend school at that age? I didn't want to bother myself with that anyways. I'd already gave out the message, and I really hoped that he abided by them next time. He stood up after eating and went straight to his room. Later that day, I learned that he'd gone straight to sleep and had woken up by 3 p.m. to have his lunch. He did not help my wife to carry out any of the morning chores. Although I wasn't expecting him to, or rather, I would have let him off if he had offered to help, because I know he's a visitor, and I shouldn't bother him with much of this, but deep down, I wish he would have asked. I spoke to my wife that evening, and she claimed that she wasn't bothered by it, and that she could live with that as she has been doing it all by herself in the meantime. I totally agree with that, and almost felt bad for wanting him to join in on chores. The next morning, he came down as usual for breakfast. Just as my children strutted down the stairs, my children greeted him, and he nodded his head and went down the stairs. When he sat at the table, he didn't even bother to say a greeting to us. I mean, we were literally older than him. It was just normal to greet us when he sees us in the morning. Or maybe I was overthinking. Greetings is nothing. I mean, he is a grown man himself. He wouldn't have anybody to tell him what to do. So I said greetings to him first. My wife followed through, and he just nodded his head at us. When it was time to have breakfast, he hurriedly ate his food. My kids were laughing heartedly at him and how badly he ate his breakfast, and he shot them a strong look, and their laughs quickly died down. He sat in front of his empty plate staring into space. I have to admit, he has some really bad table manners, and I sincerely hope my kids don't try to copy it one bit. After sitting there for like a minute, he loudly pushed his chair backwards and stood up to leave the dining room. My wife, children, and I were still in the middle of our breakfast. The loud noise from the screeching of his chair grabbed everyone's attention, and we all looked up. He left as he came, leaving behind his plate dirty on the dining table this time. After my wife finished eating her breakfast, she cleared her dishes and that of her cousin, and bade me goodbye as I went to work. She was going to get the kids ready for school before leaving for work herself, and we usually take turns in taking the children to school every day. And well, today was her turn just to do that. I wondered if one day cousin would offer to join in on it, but deep down, I hope not, because he looked and acted so carefree. What if he ended up putting them in an unavoidable danger, or even crashed the car? I didn't want to think about it, so I told myself that if he ever offered to help drive them to school, I would strongly refuse the offer. I drove to work that day wondering just how he turned out like that. My wife and her cousins were pretty close and grew up more as siblings since she didn't have any siblings. So how exactly did he turn out like he did when my wife was as she was? Update number 2 the next week. Cousin suddenly decided that he needed to go spend the weekend in his friend's home, and he didn't even bother to tell anybody. The funny thing was that he took one of our cars, one of the fancy cars at that. It would have been really nice if he had informed any of us that his development or even left a note, but he did not. I just hoped he would scratch it since that was a fast car my wife had used for years, and there wasn't as much as a scratch on it. It would be too bad after all these years he leaves a dent or scratch on her precious car. That wasn't even the main reason I was worried. This was a new city. Did he even know his way around? Why didn't he ask for some advice from me or my wife before deciding to go anywhere? Sometimes, I don't know, maybe I just think too much. He was an adult, he could take care of himself, but it did not mean adults couldn't get lost. I eventually let it go, but it seemed like my wife was already used to his behavior of his, and she reassured me, telling me that he'll eventually be okay. And to be back before I even knew it. She called him and he admitted having gone to a friend's house in a nearby city, and would be back before Monday. He was currently, like I'd foreseen, he called 20 minutes later saying he was lost, and he couldn't reach his friend. I told him to ask the people around the area for an easy route or pack the car somewhere safe and take the public transit to his friend's home. I was itching to leave him stranded so he would learn a big lesson. But guess what? According to him, he wanted to drive the car to his friend's home. He was scared to leave it at someone else's hands since it was unsafe. I knew he wanted to go show off my car to his friends because as long as he finds a trustworthy and registered garage or even a car park, there's no way it wouldn't be unsafe. I didn't know what he wanted us to do at this point. I'd given him advice, but he didn't take it, and was expecting another one. I ended the conversation with, "Whatever you think is alright, then do it, but come home with my car." Surprisingly, he took offense and got angry at me for the first time since he came. Usually he would just act carefree, but this time around, he asked me what I meant by that, and accused me of caring about my car more than I cared for his safety and well-being. I was honestly surprised at the turn of events, so I apologized to avoid any further misunderstandings. I told him to drive carefully and try to figure it out his way there. I hung up. I guess it was my fault for suggesting an idea of him out of pity. Well, the following week, he came back without my car. His friend drove him to the house in a flashy car, and I wondered, if this friend of his was so rich, why didn't he just ask him to let him stay at his home until he could stand on both feet? Well, but then I realized that family would always come first before anything, so that would have been his reason for coming to my wife. His cousin first before anyone. When his friend drove to our vast estate, I was just about leaving for work. Whose strange car was this in our home? It's at that point when cousin aligned from the car. He knew it was him. He came down, waved at his friend, and strolled to my front door. I was still staring at him, expecting him to tell me where he'd kept my car, and even at least saying hello. Well, this was literally the first I'd seen him in 3 days. I deserved a hello at least. Well, he got to the front door, entered, and closed the door shut. When I noticed that he was just about to act like I wasn't there, I shouted, "Hey, bro!" But he was already through the door by now. Maybe he's just tired from the journey or whatever. I'll give him his space. I turned to look back at his friend who was now looking at me. We awkwardly greeted ourselves simultaneously, and I briskly walked to work car. Maybe I'd ask him about the car after work. What's up, guys? Mr. Reddito here. So, let me know in the comment section if OP is starting to look like a floor mat. I do have a very interesting update coming up next, update number 3, and some of you might have guessed what happened. Well, here it is. So, guess what I just found out? Cousin might have sold my car or is definitely playing stupid with me. After I got back from work that day, I asked him regarding the car, and he said it was, quote, lying safe in a garage somewhere. Okay, that wasn't my problem now. I wanted to go pick it up and return it to my garage. He suddenly started avoiding the offer by asking what we were eating for dinner and whatnot. When did we even discuss about dinner? We only ever said hi to each other, and that was me. What was making me feel so guilty to start up a conversation with someone that he never even looked twice at before? I had a bad feeling about this. So I told my wife to talk to her cousin instead and try to get the truth out of him at least. Honestly, I would have appreciated it if he told me straight up that he sold the car or borrowed it or whatever. But it'll definitely not be funny if he tries to play me for a fool. I've been through that in the past years, and I don't want to do the same presentedly. She did talk to him, the cousin, and truly, he sold my car. Wow, what a person. My wife was happy about it and threatened to throw him out of the house. Yeah. But now he was already with us for a month. Imagine asking if you could spend a few weeks with someone, and now you're still there after a month, and you have the audacity to sell their car. He ended up begging my wife to let him stay for another week, and she agreed. I did too. He definitely turned into a whole new person when he was begging for something. I couldn't say no, so I agreed. That was how I ended up letting go of that car. So what now? What else would he try to sell this time? My house? Surprisingly, he played good for a long time after that. It was not up to 4 months that he lived with us, and I was now used to his carefree behavior, laziness, and acting like he was the only one that existed in the home. I wouldn't say I completely got used to it because there were sometimes things that I got irritated with. You know, usually, if someone were to do you a favor, the least you could do is appreciate the favor that was trying to do little things around the house like go shopping, fix the sink, all those little things. But he did nothing, absolutely nothing, and waited for me and my wife to do everything as he sat back with his feet kicked up. Actually, he said he could not fix a sink or a bulb or buckle a shoe. He wasn't just lazy, he could literally do nothing for himself. And I would be lying if I said it didn't make me mad to an extent. This is a man in his 20s we're talking about. Alright everybody, Mr. Reddito here. So if you think things have escalated, you've seen nothing yet. I have one final update for you. Update number 4. It took place 10 months since cousin started living with OP. Oh boy, buckle your seatbelts, here's update 4. After claiming to stay with us for just a few weeks, it's been 10 months, now I was just looking for ways to make him leave. I wouldn't bother myself too much about all this if he could do basic things around the house and not cause any trouble to us. The day before he finally decided to go wash his own dishes after the whole 9 months of living with us, and he ended up breaking one of my kids' favorite plates. She ends up crying the whole morning as she prepared for school, and while I frantically tried to calm her down, cousin just managed to sweep the pieces of the floor and climb to his room. My wife had offered to help him so he doesn't get cut, and I quickly told her off for that. I think I might have an idea why he's the way he is. My wife and his other close relatives probably spoiled him while growing up, since he was literally the last born of the family. But if you ask me, it's not enough reason to remain a snot-nosed brat because of your upbringing. And he's a literal adult now, so he could definitely do better. My daughter, who we'll call Miley, ended up shouting, "I hate you," to him before leaving the house. Kids and their emotions. Though I think we could have avoided all this if he had simply apologized and even offered to buy a new plate, but of course not, he didn't even try. However, I didn't like how she had thrown a feet over a plate, so I did scold her, and told her next time, don't do it. She obeyed, and when she came back from school, apologized to cousin. Guess what? He gave a shrug and said, "Whatever, kid." She came to me heartbroken, telling me what he had replied to her apology, and I gave her a bear hug, and told her that he's just her uncle and he's probably in a sour mood. And he definitely meant to give her a little kiss on her cheek. Then I proceeded to give her one on behalf of him to her, and that did the trick. But I wasn't happy one bit. What kind of man is that to even do that to a child? How could you do that to my little pumpkin's face? Things went as it's always been, and I was supposed to get used to it, but I wasn't. There was a time that my son fell ill, and my wife had some extra work to finish on her MacBook at home, and I wasn't yet home from work. Actually, she gave me the details of this, and I could not believe my ears. So, she asked him to help take him to see our family doctor since she'd already booked an appointment the day before, and he said he was ill too. Seriously? Sick? How could you possibly fall sick when all you do is lay around the house and eat? Literally. And trust me, he didn't look sick one bit. So my wife tried to persuade him by telling him that she'll make it up to him. And he asked with what? And she said, with cash. What do you want? Miraculously, he was no longer sick, and then he agreed to take them to the hospital. My wife obviously turned him down and had to leave her work on standby to go with him to see the doctor herself. So, that was the new development. If you ever asked Cousin to do something around the house, he would ask for a monetary reward and compensation. And if you didn't offer him anything, he would carry on with it. It was getting so annoying, and I just stopped asking him to do anything around the house. It was already the holidays, making it a full year now, but he wasn't saying anything about moving out. Yet, he was trying to play smart with us. I mean, of course we're well off, but it didn't mean that he could do whatever he wanted to or act so entitled towards us. I personally did not raise my children like that, so I see no reason why I should have to put up with a spoiled grown man. No reason at all. There was so much work to do during the new weekend since some of my wife and I, close friends, have come to spend it with us. It was a full house, and Cousin still kept on with his usual routine. One of my friends, who I would call Mark, called me one day and asked me about the whole situation. Mark says, "What's up with the young man that's living with you? He acts so obnoxious." I laughed at this because that was the plain truth, because I couldn't even explain Cousin in a good way without lying. "Actually, he's family and—" "Oh," Mark interrupts. "Oh my, I'm sorry. I didn't know he was family, although you have only 2 brothers and I've met them. I don't know what one." Oh no, he's my wife's cousin, not my brother's, and that's pretty much how he is." So you're telling me that he's a lazy, entitled young man?" Yeah, you could say that." Mark paused for a while and reminded me of how I had been in pretty much the same situation in college, where I had a huge crush on this girl, and she demanded to move in with me. At the time, I had a roommate, but he wasn't back from school yet, so I let her in since I couldn't say no. And when he resumed, he was mad. He decided to move out of the room, and after realizing what I did was wrong, I begged him to stay, and had to tell the girl to move out. She got really mad at me and stopped talking to me, but I knew that was the right thing to do. Now that I think of it, the situations are quite similar because she was also entitled, and even asked me to let my roommate move out if he wanted to, so that she could remain with me? Well, after Mark reminded me of this, I did not ignore the warning sign, so I confronted Cousin after our friends had gone back. It was now a year and 1 month, and he wasn't saying anything about moving out or even trying to make an effort to obtain a place to live in. I consulted my wife about it, and she totally agreed. And I told him to prepare to move out next month since his favor's long overdue. He replied to me with this: You've got such a big place here, dude. Why be so stingy?" Me, stingy. That would have been the last insult that I thought that I could hear from someone. Who was he kidding? A stingy person would let you stay here and inconvenience his family for 13 months? I had it with him, so I gave him only that week to move out. And he didn't take me seriously because by the next week he was still comfortably in my home. It was almost like he was telling me that I can do nothing about it. So I decided to take it up with the police. I told him about the new development and even showed him proof that I've already reached out to the cops. The chief is a friend of mine, so it was quite easy. He couldn't believe that I could do that to him, and he had to leave after he saw I was dead serious. Well, the end of the story is this. He packed his luggage and moved out. Alright guys, I'm going to be straight up honest with y'all. This was the worst, absolute worst floor mat I've ever seen of an OP. He let everybody walk all over him. If it wasn't for his buddy Mark at the end of the story, who basically made him see, hey dude, don't you remember this time in college where you went through something similar? This is the exact same situation and you're being a floor mat again. Imagine if Mark never stepped up and said anything. I think that cousin would still be living there to this day. Do you guys agree with me? Let me know your thoughts. Drop them in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have you ever been in a situation like this when someone overstayed their welcome? Go ahead and click that subscribe button so you don't miss any future stories, and I'll see you guys in the next one.